The Daily Mail has today reported that SNP Minister Jenny Gilruth, just sat behind the First Minister, may have broken the Ministerial Code. The former Transport Minister, who Humza Yousaf promoted to be Cabinet Secretary for Education, changed plans that had been agreed for 18 months with just weeks to go. The original plans would have seen a small closure to rail services around her constituency for a few days just after Christmas last year to allow for essential upgrades to happen. Jenny Gilruth appears to have forced a change in order to give preferential treatment to her constituents at a higher cost to taxpayers and far more disruption to passengers. Does the First Minister think it's acceptable for a minister to make a political decision for her own benefit instead of acting in the interests of all of Scotland?
First Minister.
Can I say to Douglas Ross, he is making very serious accusations indeed. And of course, if there are any accusations of the Ministerial Code being broken, of course, they will be appropriately investigated. So that is an accusation that Douglas Ross is making, of course, will appropriately investigate it. But I don't believe the way that Douglas Ross has characterised that particular situation to be correct at all. On Sunday, the 21st of May, ScotRail's new timetable came into effect. It will come into effect for this year. This is another important step towards Scotland's railways as it continues to recover. So those timetable changes, well, these timetable changes, of course, happen regularly. In terms of when they happened when Jenny Gilruth was the Transport Secretary, it was done for the correct reasons, certainly from the investigation that I have done this morning, from when this story, as Douglas Ross says, has come into the public consciousness. What I would say to Douglas Ross, of course, we have invested heavily and significantly into the railway services. We have proudly taken ScotRail back into public ownership, and every decision we make, every decision that any Transport Minister under this government has made has been to the benefit of the entire railway network, including, of course, passengers up and down the country. So I don't believe the way that Douglas Ross has characterised the situation is how it has taken place. But, of course, I will investigate the issue further.
Douglas Ross.
Well, let's just clear up some of the things the First Minister said there. He says he's going to investigate, but then he said he investigated this morning and sees no fault in what Jenny Gilruth did. He also questions my characterisation of what happened. So let's just go through some of the pages and pages of FOI emails that we have seen. A Freedom of Information response makes it clear that instead of a few days of closures after Christmas, Jenny Gilruth pushed for changes that would lead to 6 weeks of disruption, including 4 full weekends. Now, Jenny Gilruth is very keen to intervene here, but I'm just reading out what we have received.
Mr Ross, if you just give me a moment. I am absolutely sure I don't need to remind members of the rules regarding behaviour in this chamber. Just be grateful if we could adhere to those, Mr Ross.
Jenny Gilruth seems to have a lot to say about this, so it would be interesting to hear what she's told the First Minister, because ScotRail advised in these emails that the plans Jenny Gilruth put forward would mean that 9,000 more customers every day would have been disrupted with her proposals. ScotRail reviewed the decision and concluded there would be, and I quote from ScotRail, greater costs with more customers disrupted or inconvenienced with the revised access plan. Jenny Gilruth's decision to scrap these changes appears to have cost the taxpayer at least £1 million. Scottish Rail Holdings board papers, also released under FOI, state this. The board is asked to note that Network Rail and ScotRail chose to do the work at this time precisely to minimise the number of passengers impacted, and Transport Scotland were fully aware and endorsed this approach. So how can Humza Yousaf defend Jenny Gilruth when she went against the advice of Network Rail, ScotRail and Transport Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, first and foremost, whenever decisions like this are made, and I remember well in my time as Transport Minister, it's so crucial that we engage with communities. It's so crucial that we engage with communities to understand from them what the impact of any potential closure will be, Presiding Officer, and I can hear groans from either sides of the benches when it comes to engaging with communities. We always engage with our communities when it comes to any potential disruption to our transport network. And the proposed decarbonisation works on the vital rail line would have caused significant disruption right across the whole east coast of Scotland, including for passengers travelling across, yes, Fife, but also in Dundee, Perth and Aberdeen too. And the former Transport Minister has stated that she was not content that everything was being done to minimise that inconvenience over a busy festive period, a time when, of course, rightly, people are travelling up and down the country to see their loved ones, particularly in the context also of some disruption that was taking place due to industrial action at the time. And therefore, she rightly, in my view, asked Network Rail to postpone the works, which they agreed to give time to engage with the communities which would be impacted by the closure. So, to conclude, Presiding Officer, for me it's so vital that whoever the Transport Minister is, whether it was Jenny Gilruth previously, the current Transport Minister, that the needs of passengers should always be front and centre when such decisions are made. And that was clearly the case when Jenny Gilruth made that decision.
Douglas Ross.
This is getting worse for the First Minister. He's now saying that Jenny Gilruth was right to do this, and he also said that Jenny Gilruth, as the former Transport Minister, thought there were problems with this. Well, we'll come to another email. On the 19th of October 2022, Ms Gilruth understands why they are doing this, but it's not going to land well. So she agreed with the proposal, but she was worried about how it was going to land with her constituents. She should not even have been involved in this decision. She should have recused herself because of the clear potential for a conflict of interest. Concerns were raised about the Minister's actions. One civil servant, whose name is redacted in the FOI response, said this: "It might be wise to be clear why this is appropriate for Fife in particular, because other areas might expect similar. This political interference may even have forced a senior executive to resign. Chris Gibb worked in the rail industry for more than 40 years. He chaired ScotRail in 2022. He resigned just a few weeks after Jenny Gilruth's decision, after he advised against the change. And in board papers that we've seen, he raised concerns about political interference and, a quote from Chris Gibb, micromanagement by Scottish ministers, advisers and officials." First Minister, did Chris Gibb resign because of Jenny Gilruth's inappropriate actions?
First Minister.
Douglas Ross, once again, Presiding Officer, is making really serious accusations, I'm afraid, without any evidence. And what he is hoping to do, and he'll do this because he is undoubtedly desperate, is throw as much mud as possible and hoping that some of it sticks.
Members.
He will throw as much mud as possible and hope that some of it sticks. And what I would say to Douglas Ross is that conflicts of interest and the Conservative Party are not something, are definitely not a combination that I think he should look to raise. And what I would say to Douglas Ross in response to the emails that he'd read out, of course, he is being selective in what he is reading out. Yeah. What he's forgetting to mention is that this disruption, which would undoubtedly have been caused because of these works, wouldn't just have affected passengers travelling across Fife, but also Dundee, Perth, Aberdeen and other parts of the network too. So absolutely right, I would expect my Transport Minister, I would expect any member of the government to make sure that they are taking account of all of those who might be impacted and all of those who might be affected. So what I would say to Douglas Ross is look at the facts, don't just throw around mud hoping some of it sticks. And speculation, frankly, doesn't help anybody in here, certainly doesn't help passengers that we are committed to improving the rail network for.
Douglas Ross.
Do you know what didn't help passengers? Was the former Transport Minister's decision. She was emailed on the 7th of November 2022 at 17:40 and told by ScotRail that greater costs and more customers would be disrupted and inconvenienced with the revised plans. At least £1 million extra in associated costs and 9,000 additional passengers every day because of the decision she took. So the First Minister can cut out all that rubbish about standing up for passengers when it's very clear that the decision taken by Jenny Gilruth led to a poorer service. Now, this looks like a clear breach of the Ministerial Code. Jenny Gilruth is smirking at this, and well she might, because the First Minister already seems to believe she is innocent. But the Ministerial Code states that you must keep separate the roles of a minister and their role as a constituency MSP. This doesn't just look like there was preferential treatment in the constituency. It looks like a truly awful decision that will cost taxpayers millions and lead to greater disruption. 5 months on, the essential works that Jenny Gilruth delayed have still not happened. This looks like a clear-cut, sackable offence, but at the very least, this needs more than the First Minister looking at this over breakfast. It needs an urgent investigation now. So will the First Minister confirm to Parliament right now that he will launch an investigation into his minister today?
First Minister.
To my understanding, this is not the first time this issue has been raised. I think it has been raised months before as well. Now, of course, I wasn't First Minister at the time. I will, as I said in my response to Douglas Ross's first question, I will look at the accusations that are being made. But what I would say to Douglas Ross, of course, is that Jenny Gilruth was not and is not also the MSP for Dundee, Perth and Aberdeen. These decisions were taken, of course, because they were affecting railway passengers right across the network, and particularly across the north east of Scotland. So with the information that I absolutely have in front of me, it seems to me pretty clear that Jenny Gilruth made those decisions so that, of course, disruption wouldn't affect more passengers right across the network. That is something I would expect Jenny Gilruth to have done at the time. It's something I expect the current Transport Minister to do. When these important, vital works, particularly around decarbonisation, have to take place, how do we do them in a way that they minimise disruption, particularly during the busy festive period? And what I would say to the Conservatives is that we take the issues of the Ministerial Code extremely seriously. Not something that could be said about the Conservatives by any way, shape or form.